Please be seated.
I've sustained the objection and the problems have been resolved, so we'll go on.
So as the jury.
Could you please read back the last question?
Well, not after I sustained the objection.
But I thought the issue was resolved.
Oh, the issue is resolved. The bottom line is the objection was sound, but it was an issue that doesn't actually strike at the heart of the evidence, so I am going to let her have the question read back because there was nothing objectionable about the content which is sought in the answer. It was just what had happened earlier this morning, so go ahead. You can have the question back.
Thank you.
Well, how close in time to the time of the interview or the day of the interview was it? Answer, it was the same day question, very same day. Is that the question?
No, the next one.
There's an objection. The objection was right there. Oh, you want to go back? No.
Okay, I thought there was another question after that. So Mr. Jensen spoke to you the very same day about his interview with Detective Ratzberg?
That's correct.
And did he describe to you the suspicions that Detective Ratzberg had raised during the interview regarding the cause of Julie Jensen's death?
Yes.
And what did he tell you?
He told me that one of them was that Mark had suffocated Julie. Mark talked about specifically broken blood vessels in the lungs as being the reason for that suspicion.
And what was his emotional state or demeanor as he was discussing this interview?
He was very significantly and visibly shaken.
Now, I want to go back to when Mr. Jensen was talking about Mrs. Jensen's deteriorating, or claiming that she was in a deteriorating condition. Did he talk about what happened with Mrs. Jensen while he was in St. Louis at a conference in November of 1998?
Did he talk to me in November of 1998, or was the conference in November of 1998?
Did he talk to you about Mrs. Jensen's health while he was at the conference, that something had occurred while he was at the conference regarding her health?
Yes.
And what did he tell you about that?
I believe we're talking about the issue where Mark had indicated Julie had vomited around the house.
And why was he telling you this, if you know?
Objection.
What was the context of the conversation?
Reinforcing her deterioration.
Also speculation.
Don't give your analysis as to why the statement was made. Just, why don't you just put a new question out?
Okay. When did this conversation occur?
What conversation? He testified to a conversation. Yeah.
I think he testified that there was a conversation in which the accused stated that while he was at the conference that Mrs. Jensen had vomited.
And so the question again was?
When was this conversation?
Probably November of 98.
Okay, and where were you?
At the office.
Okay. And what did he say?
He simply stated that she had been very sick and had, vomited all over the house.
Did he?
And that the carpets needed to be cleaned, that sort of thing.
Nothing further.
As you've indicated, Mark Jensen told you in November of 1998 that his wife was depressed. True?
Yes.
Told you that she'd been crying regularly, right?
Yes.
Told you that she was withdrawn.
Yes.
Told you that she'd sometimes lock herself in the room, correct?
Yes.
That she was losing weight.
Yes.
That she would sometimes swallow large amounts of aspirin or threaten to.
No, not that specifically.
You don't recall that specifically?
That's correct.
Are you saying you didn't say that, or after 9 years you don't necessarily recall?
It's been a long time, and after 9 years, I don't specifically recall that.
He was concerned because he felt that she needed to see a doctor for her mental health, right?
Objection, Your Honor. As to what he was concerned about.
Well, it's whether the accused stated that he was concerned. As I understand the question, it's not the concerns of the witness, which would be irrelevant, but rather communicated concerns of the accused, which,
Would be hearsay?
no, statement of a party, well, statement of the, I think, given the examination that the state has done, would not be hearsay. The objection's overruled.
Please repeat the question.
He expressed that he was concerned because he felt that Julie needed to see a doctor for her mental health, right?
No, my recollection is that it wasn't for mental health, it was for physical health.
Well, he had indicated that she was depressed, right?
In passing, that wasn't,
Well, I asked you if she was depressed, and you said yes, correct? Correct?
correct.
And she was crying, which is a symptom of her depression, right?
Objection.
That was what was represented to you. And please, there's one lawyer, and that's the rule of the
I think that
court.
Ms. Gabrielle should handle the objections.
She did object, Your Honor.
I did.
And what's the objection?
The objection was that he's assuming that it was a fact as opposed to what Mr. Jensen said was happening or
I
claiming.
thought the question began with, and he indicated that she was crying.
That's not how the last question began.
Well, we'll find out.
He indicated that.
Well, just a minute, she can't, oh, you're going to ask
I'm
the
just going to
question?
ask it.
All right. More
He
can I ask?
indicated that she was crying, right?
Yes,
And he attributed that to depression, not some physical pain, right?
I don't know what you did, yes,
And she was withdrawn, and that related to depression issues, right?
Objection, it's calling for
Well,
speculation.
now I think that unless, I don't know, the question as asked sounds as if it could be interpreted to ask for the opinion of the witness.
He related that she was withdrawn, right?
yes,
And he was telling you that that withdrawal related to her depression, right?
you're phrasing my answer that, I mean, I would say no. I don't agree with the way you're phrasing. You're giving me a statement rather than, I guess I don't agree with what you're saying entirely. Can I answer beyond that? You gave me a bunch of symptoms, and while I answered yes to all of those, I don't assign them
Judge.
equal weight.
All right. Did the accused indicate that his wife was suffering from depression?
There was some discussion of that.
Did he indicate any symptoms of what he thought showed that she was suffering from depression?
Well, the symptoms that Mr. Albee listed.
Which were what?
I talked about crying, being withdrawn, and things of that nature.
Go ahead.
He told you that she was miserable, right?
Yes. Not in so many words, but the implication was there, yes.
Do you recall testifying on August 29th, 2007, line 13, page 37? He told you that she was miserable. Answer, that's right.
Objection, Your Honor. Oh, I'm sorry.
Your Honor, that's not inconsistent with what he just testified to.
He said not in so many words, so it's pretty clear.
All right, overruled.
Fair enough, yes.
He told you that he thought she needed help, or he said that she needed help, right?
Yes,
He said he was encouraging her to go to the doctor.
that's correct.
And did you find anything unusual about someone wanting to have their wife go to the doctor?
Objection, Your Honor.
That does appear to be irrelevant.
Well, I think given the direct examination,
But you're asking what his reaction was as opposed to his just reporting what occurred and what was said.
okay. He told you that Julie...
Well, I will say this is not a big matter in my estimation, and there was testimony that is a consequence of discussion at one time or another with the accused. He had called the witness had called his own wife and made a suggestion to her, so I guess I'm going to let you have the answer.
I think I finished the question, but I'll come back to that. Mark told you that Julie feared ending up like her mother, right?
Yes,
And he told you that her mother had had some problems with alcohol,
yes,
and that she had had to be hospitalized for that alcohol use?
yes,
And Julie feared ending up the same way, right? That's what he told you?
yes,
And he told you that Julie feared being hospitalized for mental issues, right?
yes,
And so it was mental issues that he was talking to you about that he thought that she should see a doctor for.
Yeah, the one-word answer is no. When we talked about seeing a doctor or Julie seeking help, it wasn't for mental issues, it was for physical issues.
But she was losing weight, right?
That's correct.
You understand that to be a symptom of depression, right?
Objection. That calls for speculation, and it's really irrelevant
Well,
what...
the problem is that's being created, and I don't want to say you're creating a problem, but the problem that's being created is that the witness is saying, well, no, they were health issues that she was talking about. So he is doing some interpreting there. So I think it's fair for the defense to ask questions that bear on the interpretation that he's drawing. So the objection is overruled.
Please repeat the...
You understand that losing weight is one symptom of depression, right?
It certainly...
Objection, Your Honor. This calls for expertise that Mr. Nehring does not have, or at least there's no foundation of it.
Overruled.
Then yes.
And based on Mr. Jensen's expressed concerns, you had your wife give Julie Jensen a call, correct?
Yes.
And they went out to lunch, was your understanding?
Yes.
And you know people that are close to you that have suffered from depression, right?
Objection as to the relevance.
Overruled. Well, I guess it may be irrelevant unless you're going to link it up with some observation that he made.
That's fair. And he also told you that while he was in St. Louis, when he returned from St. Louis in early November, she had thrown up all over the carpets, right?
Yes.
And that she hadn't even bothered to clean it up, right?
Yes.
And that he had to, upon his return, call the carpet cleaners and have them come and clean the carpets.
That's correct.
Do you have any reason to think that the carpets weren't cleaned in that house?
Objection as to the relevance.
Overruled.
No.
The In 1998, did you take any notes?
No,
Did you have a journal?
no,
Did you have any kind of diary or anything that you recorded anything about Mr. Jensen?
no,
You didn't contact police or any other law enforcement officer in 1998, right?
that's correct.
You didn't talk to anybody in 99?
That's correct.
You didn't talk to anybody in 2000?
That's correct.
You didn't talk to anybody in 2001?
That's correct.
And you took no notes during that time to help you recall what had happened, right?
That's correct.
And you took no notes to help you make sure you had dates right, correct?
That's correct.
And no police officer came to interview you during that period of time, right?
That's correct.
As far as you know, no police officer ever came to interview anybody at Mark's office place during that time, correct?
That's correct.
And so the first time you ever talked with anyone was after Mark was charged, correct?
Yes,
About 3.5 years after Julia passed away?
yes,
Fair to say your memory of events in 1998 was not as good in March 2002 as it was in November 98 or December 98?
I felt a lot better, and it's fair to say.
And your memory today, after 9 years, is probably weaker than it was in March 2002, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And certainly weaker than it was in November and December 1998 of those events.
Of course.
And the first time you ever gave a statement was after you had read the criminal complaint in this case, correct?
Yes,
That is, you had obtained a copy of the criminal complaint from the internet,
yes,
and you had read some publicity about the case,
yes,
and then that's the first time that you talked with Detective Ratsburg
yes.
or anybody else in law enforcement, true?
Detective Ratsburg.
And he was the first person you had ever spoken to.
That's correct.
He told you other things that he felt were negative about Mark during that interview that weren't in the criminal complaint?
Objection calls for hearsay.
It doesn't sound like they're being offered to prove the matter, which was asserted in the...
Certainly not for the truth. Yeah.
Objection, Your Honor, counsel's answer.
Just a minute. The objections have to be handled by Ms. Gabrielle.
Then I object to Mr. Albee's editorializing.
It was,
Well, I think he was repeating what I said. What did he say?
I was just
Never
late.
mind.
What did he say?
I said what you had said, I was just late.
You did right.
Yeah.
All right, go on.
I think there's a question out there. Could you repeat the question, please?
He told you other things that he felt were negative about Mark during that interview that weren't in the criminal complaint.
I cannot recall the contents, the details of that discussion.
You can't recall the things Detective Ratsburg may have told you?
That's correct. I mean, we no doubt talked at length, but gosh, the details I cannot remember.
And fair to say that Detective Ratsburg was negative toward Mr. Jensen in that conversation?
No, I think he was very objective the first few times that we met.
Well, what did he say positive about Mr. Jensen?
My recollection is that he tried very hard not to lead me in a negative light.
I'm asking what he said positive. I'm not asking for your impressions. I'm asking you to tell me something positive he said about Mark Jensen during that.
Well, Your Honor, I'm going to object to the relevance of the question anyway.
It would be my impression, and you can convince me that your question should remain, but it would be my impression that when the police are investigating the circumstances of a death, that they wouldn't go to interview people and then start making declarations themselves, but would rather be asking questions. Now, if indeed the officer was making declarations, affirmative declarations about somebody, then I think it's fair game, but otherwise, if it consisted just of questions, even if they may have cast a bad light on the accused, that would not, you understand where I'm going?
I do, I know that I don't know what assertions there were, and I don't want to bring up the particular subject matter, but I know that Detective Ratsburg from reports that group here.
Did Lieutenant Ratsburg make assertions about Mr. Jensen, either positive or negative?
As I stated, I can't remember specific topics that we discussed. What I was trying to reply, or the way I was trying to reply was the tone.
Your Honor.
All right, why don't you ask another question and we'll move along.
Mr. Jensen was at work on December 2nd, right?
Yes,
And I take it you don't recall exactly when he was in the office on that day?
that's correct.
Can't say if he was in most of the day, a short part of the day, you just recall that he was in, true?
Yes,
And similarly, on December 3rd, he was in the office, right?
wrong.
It's your testimony that he was not in the office on December 3rd?
That's my testimony today.
Now, you testified at a previous hearing on August 29th, 2007, right?
Yes,
And you were asked the following question, and you gave the following answer, page 34, line 7. Question, do you recall talking to him on December 3rd? Answer, yes. Question, okay, and what was that conversation? Answer, it was nothing out of the ordinary, it was just typical conversation. Question, at the office? Answer, that's correct. Is that what you said in August 29th, 2007?
yes, it is.
And then you've had several conversations with prosecutors since August 29th, 2007? Is that true?
Yes,
Have you also had conversations with Detective Ratsburg since August 29th, 2007?
yes,
And you've discussed your testimony from August 29th, 2007, right? With prosecutors and with Detective Ratsburg?
yes,
And now your story has changed as to whether you saw Mr. Jensen on December 3rd?
yes, I reviewed the,
Uh,
yes,
Now, you were friendly with Mark Jensen until the time he was charged, true?
that's your word, cordial. Yes,
You agree that you were still friendly with him until he was charged?
superficially, yes.
Well, were you asked the following questions, and did you give the following answers at the last hearing? Page 30, line 8. Following Julie's death in December of 1998, you continued to work with Mark until the time he was charged in this case. Answer, yes. Question, your offices remained close together. Answer, yes. Question, you're still friendly with Mark. Answer, yes, I was.
Well, Your Honor, that's taken out of context if you look at the next 4 lines.
Judge, there's one question on the table.
Overruled.
Yes,
But you declined to do things socially with him after that time, right?
I never did
After
anything
what time?
socially.
After what time?
After Julie Jensen's death, you were no longer doing things socially with Mark Jensen, right?
We only did things socially with Mark and Julie and the family.
And in fact, you had stopped doing things socially with Mark several months before Julie Jensen passed away, correct?
That's correct.
So there wasn't a change when she died, you'd already stopped doing things socially.
Yes,
But you remained friendly with him at the end of 1998, right?
yes,
And you remained friendly with him until he was charged in this case?
yes,
Until you had a conversation with Detective Ratsburg around that time, right?
it was around that time, yes.
Now, do you recall in late summer 1998 going to a dinner with Mark Jensen, Mr. Mathis, and some other people from St. Louis?
Yes,
Objection as to the relevance.
I'm going to take a break. Please don't talk about the case during the break. Usual. What's up? What's up?
Are you asking me?
You made the objection?
I made the objection, that's right. I don't see the relevance of asking about a dinner that they attended at some point, I think in 1998. And in addition, I know the next question is going to ask for hearsay, and I would object to that as well. This came up at the forfeiture hearing where the hearsay rules didn't apply. Then Mr. Albee asked Mr. Nehring about a dinner, I don't recall exactly when, but sometime in 1998, that Mr. Nehring attended, but that Julie Jensen did not attend. And that Mr. Jensen had told Mr. Nehring that Julie Jensen didn't attend that because she didn't want to go or some reason like that. And those self-serving types of statements are not admissible, and they're not related to any conversations that the state asked about on the direct examination. So it's not to put something in context.
Mr. Albee.
It goes to, well, certainly it's a prior consistent statement, if you would, of Mr. Jensen's in the event that he testifies. What it is.
He hasn't testified yet.
A prior consistent statement is not going to be allowed in unless and until he testifies.
But Mr. Jensen's state of mind at the time is admissible about his wife's situation.
Well, the problem is that it does sound as if it's being offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted by the declarant. The declarant.
It's that Julie said it. It's Mr.
No, Julie didn't say it.
Excuse me.
There's two layers. And you can't offer what Mrs. Jensen said because the court has found that the accused procured her absence.
But I need it for completeness purposes, and it's Rule 806. I can impeach all of her statements, 90806.
But that wasn't her statement. That's what Mr. Jensen said.
And on top of that, if that was layer number one of the hearsay is whether or not is the question about Mrs. Jensen and her credibility, which you can't meet. And then the next layer is the statement of the accused, who is looked at as the declarant, and he is not subject to cross-examination at this moment in time, and he's offering something to prove the truth of the matter asserted. That is that Mrs. Jensen was stating that she was too ill to attend the dinner.
Well, and I think that's necessary to put things in context given, well, it's fine. I mean, I disagree. I think it's admissible to show the state of mind, and that was the belief of the time by Mr. Jensen that his wife truly was depressed.
But that's a self-serving statement.
Well, that's the issue in the trial.
Well, then Mr. Jensen needs to testify to that.
The objection is sustained. All right.
I mean, Judge, I think it's necessary. If Mr. Nehring's allowed to testify to everything that Mr. Jensen told him at the time.
But let me interrupt you. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry. Maybe I was premature.
If he's testifying to all the statements that Mr. Jensen was making in the summer of 1998 and in the fall of 1998, he can't just give one side of the conversation. It's necessary for completeness that Mark Jensen was giving him specific examples of how Julia was depressed, because he's clearly conveyed his belief that these statements are bogus, and he's acting like they're very superficial claims. And in fact, Mark was giving him some specific examples, which is what I ought to be able to go into for completeness purposes.
Okay, you and I do not see eye to eye on this. And I think the case of this, I think it's the case of the state against Johnson, is very explicit that the defendant cannot offer his own statements
And Judge, I mean, and in the event Mr. Jensen testifies, I'm supposed to recall all these witnesses for this one question?
And what can I say? I will tell you that I tried a murder case once where I accepted what I, to this moment, still believe was a good faith representation by the defense attorney that the defendant was going to testify. And in the end, the defendant elected not to testify. And I had admitted all kinds of evidence I ought not have done. And I don't think, I'm not claiming that I had been bushwhacked or anything, but you know as well as I do that you can't make, well, you don't even make the decision, but you, A, are not in a position to make a representation on that subject. You can give me some general belief as to what you think, but you can't, A, you can't make a binding representation, and B, you can't predict what advice you would even give at this moment in time. So it's a mistake I don't want to make a second time, okay? All right, anything else now? Let's
No, Your
start at, I beg your pardon?
I said, no, Your Honor.
Oh, okay. Let's start at 1:45.
Let's go down to.
Go ahead. I think I
You sustained my objection.
sustained, yes, I did. That's it. I remember now. I sustained the objection. Go ahead, Mr. Albee.
Mr. Nehring, you didn't see Julie Jensen in December of 1998, right?
Other than at the funeral home, that's correct.
You didn't see Julie Jensen in November of 1998.
That's correct.
So you weren't in a position to personally evaluate anything about her condition in November of 1998, true?
True.
You saw her once in October of 1998, right?
I believe I stated that was a recollection, correct?
And that was a 5, 10, maybe 15-minute kind of interaction?
Maybe an hour or two, but yeah, it was brief.
Was that the time when you stopped by on a bike with your wife?
Yes.
And you think that was an hour or two?
Well, it's a long ride, so I can't remember exactly how long we stayed there, but it's a long ride, and it would have probably, we would have stopped for more than 5 minutes.
Maybe less than 15?
No, I think probably an hour or two.
You do think an hour or two?
Yes.
Okay. And prior to that, you hadn't seen Julie Jensen for many months, right?
That's correct.
You indicated you spoke with Mark Jensen on December 4th, right?
Yes.
That's a Friday?
Yes.
And that's the day after his wife passed away?
Yes.
He told you that she had died?
He phoned and told me that, yes.
Okay, he wasn't in the office that day, right?
That's correct.
And in this conversation, he told you that he guessed it was a drug interaction, right?
That's correct.
He didn't have any information from any authorities as to cause of death, true?
Yes.
That is true, right?
Yes, it is.
And he surmised, he told you that she had gone to see the doctor that week, right?
Yes.
And he told you that the doctor had prescribed some antidepressants, right?
You're leading me in a sense. I know she went to the doctor, and I think there was a prescription, but the details beyond that are not clear.
You don't remember if it involved antidepressants?
At the moment, I don't. That's correct.
Did he ever tell you at some later point that she had gone to the doctor and she's prescribed
Objection.
antidepressants?
Calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Judge, there's testimony as well about drug interactions after her death, about searches on the computer.
What?
Sustained. The objection is sustained.
In that conversation, and this is the same conversation in which he told you that he picked up the kids, right? On his way home on December 3rd, true?
You said the same, please start over.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. On December 4th, you had this telephone conversation with him in which he told you that his wife had passed away.
Yes.
And in that conversation, he was describing some events of December 3rd and said that he had picked up his children, right?
No, that conversation occurred at a different date.
Oh, when did that conversation occur?
I don't know exactly, but it was probably a week or two later. It was just a general curiosity, and that's why I asked him.
Okay. And so was that in this December 4th conversation in which he told you his wife had passed away? Was that all that was said in that conversation?
Pretty much, other than probably something to the effect that I think it was a drug interaction, and that was about it. It was a very brief conversation.
Just to let you know, his friend and coworker.
That's right.
And then is the next time you saw Mr. Jensen at the funeral?
What day was the funeral?
Yeah,
I don't know how many.
You were the one there.
I'm not clear. I don't know how many days passed, and I don't clearly recall if I talked to him or saw him in between.
You don't recall seeing him or talking to him in between?
I don't recall specifically that I did or did not. That's correct.
But you did attend was it the wake or the funeral? What?
Yes, the showing.
The showing, okay. You don't recall what day that was?
No, I don't.
There's some testimony about Mr. Klug, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Klug told you in 2006 about a conversation he had with Mark Jensen, right?
Yes.
A conversation that he claimed happened in 1998, correct?
That's correct.
And a conversation that, well, you knew to talk to Mr. Klug because of things that other people at Stiefel Nicholas had been saying about Mr. Klug, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Klug told you that he and Mark went out in Appleton, and Mark said he wanted to kill his wife, right?
If you're asking me, that's what I said. That's correct. That is what I said. But it's come to my attention since that it, of course, was not Appleton. It was St. Louis.
Well, you were asked at the last hearing what Mr. Klug told you, right? Is that right? Do you recall that? Let me ask. Page 81, line 21, August 29th, 2007. Question, when did he say this conversation took place? Answer, when Mark was up there helping them open the office, he said they'd been drinking. Question, and that they went out in Appleton and Mark said he wanted to kill his wife? Answer, that's correct. He said Mark had been drinking heavily. That's what you said on August 29th, right?
Correct.
And what you were testifying to on August 29th was your memory of what Mr. Klug told you, right?
Yes.
And now you've been told other information since then, is what you're saying, right?
Objection, he didn't say that. It assumes a fact not in existence. Not in evidence. Or in existence.
Rephrase your question.
You've become aware of other information since that time, right?
Yes.
And because of that other information, you've concluded that Mr. Klug must have said something else to you. Is that right?
No, what I've concluded is I misspoke, or I was incorrect when I stated that it was Appleton. Is that an answer to the question?
Now, you also said that Mr. Klug told you that other people were, well, let me ask you, did Mr. Klug tell you other people were there that would have heard Mr. Jensen tell this to Ed Klug?
Ed Klug stated that there were other people that were aware of Mark having said that. That's correct.
Did Mr. Klug tell you that other people were there when Mark said it?
I can't recall.
Did Mr. Klug tell you that there were other people there that would have heard the conversation between him and Mr. Jensen?
I believe I said that.
Well, what do you recall now?
I can't recall.
And on August 29th, 2007, you did recall that conversation with Mr. Klug and whether other people were there, right?
That's correct.
And at page 82, line 4, question, and were they alone? Answer, no. Ed seemed to believe there were other people there that would have heard that, right?
That's correct.
Now you seem, be fair to say you're uncomfortable with those answers right now?
Yes, it was a long time ago. Yes, the clarity simply isn't there. You talked about my memory's fading over time, and it's a fact.
Now, Mr. Klug told you these things in the fall of 2006, right?
That's correct.
So this, when you recited these facts at the last hearing, or you recited what you recalled at the last hearing, that memory was less than a year old, right?
Yes.
And everything that you told Detective Ratzberg was 3.5 years old, right?
At that time, yes, it would have been at the initial conversation with him.
And other things you were telling us for the first time 9 years after the fact, right?
That's correct.
And it's certainly possible that you don't remember things correctly that you're testifying to from 9 years ago, right?
Of course.
Now, you talked about Mark having an interview with Detective Ratzberg.
Yes.
And did he talk to you immediately after the interview?
Yes, the same afternoon that he was released.
Did he come into work?
Yes, we talked about it in my office.
And you said after he was released.
That's correct.
Now, did he tell you that Detective Ratzberg had asked him to stop in for just a few moments in the morning?
Yes.
And that he had ended up being there interrogated for 7 or 8 hours?
Yes.
And that did he tell you that Detective Ratzberg was very difficult with him?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
Yes.
And did he say that both Detective Ratzberg and another detective were asking questions?
I don't recall that.
Did he tell you that this interrogation took place in a small interview room
Yes.
and that it continued nonstop for the entire day, right?
Yes.
And when Mark said that Detective Ratzberg said something about suffocation, you didn't know whether there was any truth to what Detective Ratzberg had said, right?
Clearly, yes, that's correct.
And Mark certainly didn't say that was true, right?
Of course. That's correct.
He told you that that was preposterous, right?
No, but he certainly did not say it was true.
He made it clear to you it wasn't true, right?
That's correct.
Now, you testified that you saw Mark, well, you were aware, I think is what you said, that Mark was looking up drug interactions at some time, correct?
Yes.
And he did this after Julie passed away because he said he suspected that the drugs she had taken may have played a role in her death, right?
That's correct.
He was concerned that either she had a bad reaction to the drugs or an interaction between the drugs she was taking.
That's correct.
And he spent some time trying to look at those things.
That's correct.
And there was no one who had confirmed any cause of death at that point, right?
That's correct.
And so you didn't find it unusual that a husband would be searching to try to figure out what had caused his
Objection,
young
Your Honor.
wife. And did you see Mr. Jensen looking up drug interactions? That is, did you see the screens?
No, I didn't read the details of a screen that I can recall.
Were you talking to him in his office while he was looking up drug interactions?
That's correct.
And he'd be on the computer and you'd be in the office talking to him?
That's correct.
And tell me what you recall about how, about the interior of Mr. Jensen's office.
Are you asking me where I would have been standing?
No, if you could, are you able to describe the interior of Mr. Jensen's office?
Sure. Well, when you walk in, there's a desk. Is that what you're asking me?
Well, yeah, let me see if I can try to describe it to you and you tell me if I'm accurate. As you walk in the door, there's a sort of a U-shaped desk to the left, is that correct?
That's correct.
And
Open to the right.
I beg your pardon?
And the U shape, as you described it, opens to the right.
Okay, as you walk in the door, it opens, it's on the left side and it opens to the right.
That's correct.
And Mark had two computers in there, right?
That's correct.
Basically one in each corner of the U.
That's correct.
Does a U have corners?
Square.
Well,
It's a square U.
I'll show it in a minute. and We'll see. And those computers were in the corners facing the middle of the office, correct?
Yes.
Wait, can I see?
May I see Mr. Romero?
Mr. Nehring, let me show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 30. And does that drawing represent the layout of Mark Jensen's office as you recall it?
Yes.
Fair to say that drawing's not to scale?
It is not to scale.
Fair to say the drawing's not very well done?
It's a beautiful, beautiful drawing. It's incomplete in that there are a couple of chairs in the front, between the front wall and the desk.
But that's the general layout showing where the computers are and where the desk is and where is the door when you walk in, correct?
That's right.
And I would move Defendant's Exhibit, is that 30?
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
No, we receive.
And permission to publish that to the jury?
All right.
Okay, on the screen behind you, Mr. Nehring. And so, at the bottom of the screen, there's an indication of door. I take it that's where you would walk into Mr. Jensen's office?
Yes.
And you said there are a couple extra chairs, but where it's marked chair, would that be typically where Mr. Jensen would sit to do his work?
Yes.
And then in each corner of the U shape, there are computers, correct?
Yes.
So those computers face the interior of the office, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you've indicated at no time did you ever see the screen of Mr. Jensen looking up any drug interactions, right?
What I meant was I saw the screen. You can easily see the screen when you walk in, even on your drawing. If you walk in, you can see the screen. What I meant was that I didn't see, or I can't remember specific things on the screen.
Right. You don't remember ever seeing anything about drug interactions on the screen?
Not that I can recall.
And you certainly don't remember anything about poisons or anything like that on the screen?
Correct.
And so those he did look at drug interactions after his death, but you say he was looking before her death.
That's correct.
And is that another fact that you think after 9 years you've confused?
Not at all. It's very clear.
Or that you confused after 3 years when you spoke with Mr. Ratsberg?
Objection, Your Honor.
I don't understand the question.
The objection is overruled. But if he doesn't understand, why don't you state it again?
That's right. I mean, the first time you ever talked to anybody about drug interactions was 3.5 years after the time period involved, right?
Clarify anybody? You mean anybody in law enforcement?
That's right.
That's correct.
As noted in that drawing, Mark Jensen had 2 computers in his office.
Yes.
You did work on both of them?
Yes.
And the one was the Stiefel computer, correct?
The forward computer, yes.
And he also had another computer that belonged to him.
That's correct.
And the computer that belonged to him was in that computer in his office from 1998 through the time he was arrested?
That's fair to say, although my recollection is that he had a laptop as well, and they may have interchanged from time to time, but yes, he always had a second computer there.
He never made any claim about the other computer being fried or anything like that, right?
You mean his personal computer?
Right.
That's correct.
And when his computer had this problem, he sent it to St. Louis, right?
Yes,
And that was the protocol at Stiefel Nicholas, right?
that's correct. Yes.
And you testified to some fairly rigid rules involving people who are employed doing stock trades. I mean, you talked specifically about opening mail, for example, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's unusual because there has to be some greater security in your field, right?
That's correct.
And by the same token, anybody who works at Stiefel understands that their employer may take an interest in their computer, right?
Objection as to what employees would understand.
You need to rephrase your question.
Well, at Stiefel Nicholas, your company puts security at a premium. That'd be fair to say?
Yes.
They have to be absolutely sure that all its traders, stockbrokers, what would you refer to yourself as?
Investment advisors, but stockbrokers.
That all its stockbrokers scrupulously follow all the rules, right?
That's correct.
And on occasion, they'll conduct audits, correct?
Yes.
And might that include computer examinations?
It never has in the time I've been there. And it may occur, at another location, but I'm not aware of it happening physically at the branch level.
Are your computers hooked up, your company computers hooked up to a system?
That's correct.
So someone in St. Louis, that's the headquarters in St. Louis?
That's correct.
And can they do an examination of the computers there?
Yes.
And now, do you mean physically examine them in St. Louis or examine them from St. Louis electronically?
From St. Louis electronically.
Yeah, they can see whatever we can see if they choose.
And it's, that computer in St. Louis presumably would have been available to Pleasant Prairie Police if they had ever wanted to get it, right?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Well, do you know what Stiefel Nicholas in St. Louis did with that computer?
Yes, I do.
Do they maintain it?
I know it was on a shelf, and I believe the Pleasant Prairie Police did in fact pick it up.
In 2002?
I don't remember when they went and got it, but I believe they did.
Now, you recall that it was only after your interview and after Mr. Jensen's arrest that Pleasant Prairie Police came and took Mr. Jensen's computers at his office, right?
That's correct.
The ones that were there in 2002, correct?
Yes.
And does that refresh your recollection as to when they took the computer from St. Louis?
No, because I think I talked to them about that at a later date, so I don't remember when they went to St. Louis and picked up the other one.
So you think it may have even been later?
I think it was later, yes.
Okay. You testified to Mark taking some trips to St. Louis to see Kelly, and I wasn't very clear on the time frame, so let me just try to break that down. First of all, your understanding is that this affair began in July, August? What was it?
I would have said July or August.
And from that time until December 3rd, 1998, what's your understanding of how many times Mark Jensen went to St. Louis?
I can't put a number on it. It occurred frequently, is my recollection.
Once a week?
Yes?
May I see you lawyers for a moment, please? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Have you driven to St. Louis ever, sir?
I'm sorry?
Have you driven to St. Louis ever, Mr. Nehring?
Yes.
From Kenosha, 5 hours, 6?
Maybe 5.5 from Racine.
And your testimony is he was driving once a week?
My testimony isn't that he did it every week, but that he did it frequently, and you asked me weekly, and give or take, that's correct.
So it's your testimony that from, let's just say August 15th, September 15th, October 15th, November 15th, a couple more weeks in November. We had like 15 weeks there. You think he was there 15 times?
I don't think the visitation occurred at a stable rate. In other words, I think it accelerated, it began at a slower pace and would have picked up. So would he have visited 15 times? That's a fair ballpark number. I don't have a specific number, but that might be fair.
In St. Louis?
Visits to St. Louis?
Yeah, I'm asking about in St. Louis.
That's correct.
And he would drive on each of these occasions.
That's correct.
What day of the week would he go?
I don't think there was a specific day. That is not my recollection that every Friday he left or every Monday he left. It was a random event.
Was it during the week?
Yes.
And would he miss work?
Clearly. Yes, he wasn't in the office at the time he would have left.
So he wouldn't be in the office for the whole day, all day?
That's correct. Oftentimes he'd pop in the morning and then he would leave,
So like leave at 10 or something like that in the morning?
give or take. That's correct.
And he'd be back in work the next day?
Yes.
And so roughly 15 times he'd miss a day of work to drive down to St. Louis
Roughly.
for one day.
Yes.
So he'd leave at 10 in the morning, drive 5.5 hours, get there 3:30, 4 o'clock, and be back at work the next day.
That's correct.
Do you recall Mr. Jensen driving to St. Louis to see a baseball game with Dan Exner?
Objection as to the relevance.
It doesn't strike me as, I'm gonna let you have it, but you're gonna have to get connected up.
Well, one time that you're aware of Mr. Jensen driving to St. Louis, he went with Dan Exner, right?
I'm not saying that, well, he may have, yes, that's correct. That is correct.
Do you recall that?
I think so.
They went to a baseball game down in St. Louis, right?
That's correct.
Now, you worked with Mr. Jensen from 90 to 92 at Prudential Beach?
At least for part of the year. I don't believe it was the whole year. That's correct.
And this is the period of time that Julie Jensen was having an affair, right?
Or shortly thereafter, that's correct.
Well, I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought you said that he told you about it while you were at Prudential Beach.
He did, but in 1992, I believe I would have thought her affair had ended by that time.
Okay, maybe we're talking past each other.
I think so.
She had the affair while he was at Prudential Beach. That part is right?
That's not real clear in my recollection.
Okay, but he did tell you about it while he was at Prudential Beach.
That's correct. We talked about it.
And he didn't tell you about it until what you understood to be shortly after the affair ended.
That's my recollection.
Now, he also told you about being concerned about harassment, right?
That's correct.
Harassment from Julie Jensen's former lover.
That's correct.
And he told you about her former lover actually being cited for harassment by the Pleasant Prairie Police Department during that time period, right?
Yes.
And do you have any reason to believe that he was lying, that somebody was cited for harassing his wife at that time?
No.
And from 1992 to 1998, you weren't working in the same office as Mark Jensen.
That's correct.
You don't have any particular insights or knowledge as to what kind of phone calls he received there, at least from personal knowledge, right?
Correct.
Or how secretaries reacted to anything, right?
That's correct.
Or whether he got a particular piece of mail on a particular day, right?
Correct.
You weren't back in the same office with Mark Jensen until June of 1998?
That's correct.
And it was around that point that you say there was no more harassment, right?
I didn't say there wasn't harassment. I said I don't believe we were talking about it at that time.
Okay. How about, back to the St. Louis thing, did that continue in December after Mrs. Jensen passed away, that Mark was driving to St. Louis?
I don't recall.
Well, how is it you recall that it was basically weekly before December 3rd, 1998, and you don't recall after December 3rd?
After Julie's death, a lot of perceptions, a lot of things changed. Prior to her death, it was offensive in what he was doing. After her death, it would have taken on a different tone. I simply don't recall.
Well, you would have been more attuned after her death to what Mark was actually doing, right?
No.
You would have been paying attention to see if he was doing anything suspicious.
That's not correct.
So you have no recollection of whether this supposed conduct of driving to St. Louis continued after December 3rd?
That's correct.
At the, you made some reference to this, but Mark Jensen financially was doing quite well in 1998.
Yes.
He was 39 years old, right?
If you say so, yes, give or take.
His mortgage was paid off.
I don't think I was aware of that.
Do you have some sense of what his income was at Stiefel Nicholas, or his annual income at that time?
We were all doing very well.
6 figures?
Yes.
That's all I have.
Mr. Nehring, are you aware whether Mr. Jensen knew about the law regarding marital property in the state of Wisconsin in the event of a divorce?
I can't remember a specific conversation about that.
Now, you were asked by Mr. Albee whether you spoke with Mr. Jensen between Mrs. Jensen's death and the day of her wake, and you indicated no. When?
No, please, I did not indicate no. I indicated I wasn't clear if I had or not.
You had a conversation with Mr. Jensen regarding this.
Objection leading.
I'm just trying to put it into.
I don't know, I'll have to hear a little more and then I'll,
Then it'll be too late.
well, that's a risk I'm gonna take, okay?
I can ask it?
You can ask, you might get redirected. Why don't you try to ask it in as non-leading a way as possible?
I will. Do you recall a conversation you had with Mr. Jensen regarding the suitability of Ms. Labonte coming to Mrs. Jensen's wake?
Yes.
And when did that conversation occur?
That would have occurred in that period of time, which I just said. I don't remember if I did or didn't talk to him.
And how is it that you recall this conversation?
Well, because Mark was looking for my input as to how something like that would be received.
And what else do you remember about this conversation?
Nothing.
Do you recall where you were, where Mr. Jensen was?
I would think we're in the office.
Do you recall him discussing the suitability of Ms. Labonte coming to stay at his house?
That's correct.
This is the same house he shared with Mrs. Jensen?
Yes.
And what did he ask about that?
He asked if I thought it would seem out of place if he presented her to the family and as a friend or an acquaintance from the home office in St. Louis.
And what did you tell him?
I thought it would seem out of place.
And what was Mr. Jensen's demeanor at the time that he's asking you about the suitability of Ms. Labonte coming to stay?
Judge, this wasn't gone into and crossed, and it's all been asked and answered.
Just kind of normal, complacent.
Now, you were asked by Mr. Albee about the conversation you had with Mr. Klug regarding Mr. Jensen talking about killing his wife. Do you remember that question?
Yes.
And he referred you to the transcript from August 29th, where you answered that Mr. Klug told you his conversation with Mr. Jensen occurred in Appleton. Do you remember that exchange with Mr. Albee?
Yes.
Okay. Was that a mistake in your testimony on August 29th of 2007?
Yes.
And what resources, if anything, did you use to help clarify your recollection?
I think I had a written statement that I might have looked at. I don't recall.
I move for production of that written statement.
It says, I think I might have had a written statement. Is that what you said?
That's exactly what I said.
Do you recall what?
No, I don't.
Did you want to ask any questions on this topic?
Well, this was August 29th, 2007, right?
That's correct.
Did you produce a written statement to the district attorney's office?
I did not.
Do you have a written statement with you?
No, I do not.
Where is the written statement?
I must not have one.
That's all the questions I have.
Well, did you complete your answer?
No, I'm thinking out loud as I spoke, and to answer the question, I believe the revelation that I misspoke was in talking with the district attorney's office about that error.
And Mr. Nehring, you met with myself and Mr. Jamboy prior to your testimony on August 29th, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, do you recall when you met with us?
It probably would have been within a day or two prior.
I think. We'll break from it. May I ask that you return at, is 10 minutes to 1 too early? 10 minutes to 1, and please don't talk about the case.
Please all rise.
Judge, I asked to approach because it appeared to me that, well, and actually I'd asked Mr. Nehring be excused.
Any reason to the contrary?
No.
Would you step out and, you can go to lunch or whatever and come back, what, at 10 to 1?
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I'd also ask that Mr. Nehring be specifically ordered not to talk to anybody,
Well, I'm not going to tell him he can't talk to anybody.
not even the person he orders food from. No,
Yeah.
anybody about his testimony in the case.
Pardon me?
About
Don't
his
discuss
testimony.
any aspect of your testimony or of the case if you would, sir. Okay, thanks.
Judge, I approached because my concern was there's about to be a leading question in which it would be suggested that Mr. Nehring at some point in time told the prosecutor that he met with Mr. Klug somewhere, or that Mr. Klug told him that the conversation with Mr. Jensen happened other than in Appleton. And I think that's improper. I don't think that's proper rehabilitation. I also am put in this position once again where there's no investigator and Ms. Gabrielle and or Mr. Jamboys become witnesses. And so that was the nature of my objection and concern. I can't, I don't think it's admissible rehabilitation, but also what position am I left in if she's suggesting it and putting her credibility in front of this jury?
Did you want to respond, Ms. Gabrielle?
Well, the fact of the matter is that Mr. Nehring did tell us that his conversation, that Mr. Klug's conversation with Mr. Jensen occurred in St. Louis, and that he misspoke when he testified. And I think we should be able to clear up for the jury that this isn't some recent fabrication, as Mr. Albee is trying to imply, but rather a mistake, an honest mistake. And, you know, he got to ask Mr. Klug, well, when you met with the prosecutors, you didn't say X, Y, and Z, so why can't I say when you met with the prosecutors, you did say?
Well, it just strikes me that there was a case. I think I'm going to say state against Lenarchik.
There's such a case.
Or maybe a state against Gelhart, but I think a state against Lenarchik, where the Michael McKeon asked a witness, well, didn't you tell me out in the hall thus and so? In fact, I think it's the case that changed the rule in Wisconsin about impeaching one's own witness.
But she's trying to use this as a prior consistent statement. It's admissible, and in her example with Mr. Klug.
I don't agree with you. A prior consistent. I think she's trying to impeach her witness with a prior inconsistent statement.
No, it's consistent with his testimony here today.
What am I misunderstanding? Say it again.
It is consistent with his testimony here today.
Right. Well, it's inconsistent with his testimony on a prior occasion, I should
Right.
say.
And
So to that extent, it's a prior.
Well, I don't have any notes from this conversation either.
Yeah.
And I will call Ms. Gabrielle as a witness. I will insist on calling her if he's allowed to testify to this, because yesterday, for example, and I will go into this with Mr. Klug, she told me she didn't recall whether he had said antifreeze, even though it wasn't in her notes, and it would be the most important fact you could ever imagine being in this case. And so she doesn't remember that conversation, and especially in the absence of notes. I question whether she would specifically recall what Mr. Nehring said in terms of whether it was in Appleton or St. Louis. And I think that if he says, well, that did come up because we were talking about it, I think that's because of the suggestion of the prosecution. And so I think I can cross-examine them about the basis for their suggestion to Mr. Nehring.
Did you want to respond?
Well, the fact that I may or may not have remembered, I remember this. So, you know, what can I say? I didn't remember.
Wait a minute, just a minute.
Okay.
In fairness, he wants to examine you, and I don't think I can tell him he has to be content with your hearsay statement here in the court, what you do and do not remember.
We have no problem with, I'm perfectly comfortable with Ms. Gabrielle being called to the stand by the defense if that's what he wants to do.
It strikes me that the rule about attorneys not testifying is so that they aren't arguing their own credibility to the jury. And maybe I'm wrong, I haven't looked at the rule in many, many years, but that, I think, is the core of the rule. And if she's not arguing the case and it's just Mr. Jamboy's, is there a major problem with her testifying in the case?
Well, I'd like to take a look at the rule. I agree with I think what the court says makes sense, and I think I can call her, but I haven't looked at that in a long time either. So, but I think it's problematic to try to rehabilitate the witness in this fashion. And I also, I should ask Ms. Kvidra here what her notes indicate, but my recollection with Mr. Nehring is he didn't say, I think he said he had problems remembering what Mr. Klug had actually said was ultimately his testimony, that he didn't recall what he had actually said in terms of.
No, these are all things for the jury to consider, and I don't think the court should slam the door on evidence, but rather should give as much evidence as is consistent with the rules so that they can make the best determination possible. I think that, too, we have to be cognizant of the everyday realities of how the system works. It would be easy for me to be critical of the district attorney for interviewing witnesses in the fashion in which they do, but we all, have to face the reality that some lawyers have to talk to witnesses on occasion, and sometimes their witness may say one thing to the lawyer and another thing on the witness stand, and I can't rule out that it's a reason that they're fabricating, but there are a number of other explanations. And
Well, I do move for production of any notes, Judge.
he has stated, I think he stated first that he wasn't sure, and then he stated that what triggered his memory was Ms. Gabrielle in a conversation with her, so he hasn't actually stated he had any notes right now, and you got to ask him some questions. I think the state of the record now is he recalls no notes that he's made.
I apologize, I meant Ms. Gabrielle's.
Oh, Ms. Gabrielle's notes. Any reason that he shouldn't have access to those?
I don't know if we have any.
I'm looking to see if I have any from that conversation. So,
I don't keep notes. I don't take notes, so I wouldn't have any notes from the conversation.
Well, I'll leave it at this.
if I have any, I'll show them to Mr. Albee.
I'll make a photocopy for him if you have any.
Sure.
And then, so the bottom line is I'll overrule the I don't know that there was actually an objection placed into the record. Well, actually, there was one after the jury was excused, so I don't have to say anything to the jury about an objection. And we'll pick up, and the examination, or excuse me, the answer will be permitted, but unless someone convinces me that that it would not be lawful for Ms. Gabrielle to be examined, then I will permit the examination.
And I would ask for an order that this not be done by leading questions.
That would not be done by leading.
That the questions the judge say can be asked of Mr. Nehring. I don't want him to be led through being told that the prosecution's position is that they were told.
How about this order? Everybody is to abide by the rules of evidence in this trial. How would that be?
Well, there are some rules that cause more problems than others when they're broken, and
Yep.
this would be one of them.
Leading questions
I will
are
do my
discouraged
best.
on direct examination, actually are prohibited, although I have to say, generally, I have, it's one of the rules I have a semi-permissive policy on, but certainly, one understands the reason for the rule. There are cases in which there are very serious violations, so.
In this case, it would be the equivalent of vouching because she is not on the stand yet. I haven't made any final decision. I don't know what the final rules are about that. So for her to say, well, you told,
I can ask
Well, I
it,
think the
I
best-
can ask it in a non-leading question.
I think
way.
the best starting point when he returns to the stand, since he'll have an hour plus to think about all of it, is to ask him the least leading possible question about the whole subject.
Sure.
And let him explain his thought processes, which is what we're ultimately trying to determine anyway. Okay?
thank you, Your Honor.
Don't forget, 10 minutes to 1.
Can cross-examine me?